Christmas is a time for family gatherings and warm memories. This year, my wife Emily and I invited all our relatives to our home to celebrate this wonderful holiday together. The house was decorated with garlands and tinsel, and the air was filled with the scent of ginger cookies and pine needles. Our entire family gathered around the large table. Emily's parents, Peter and Alice, her sister Sophie with her husband Mike and their children, and my brother Jack with his wife Linda. Everyone was chatting loudly, laughing, exchanging news and gifts. The atmosphere was exceptionally warm and heartfelt. When dinner was coming to an end and the guests began to leave, I noticed that my mother-in-law Alice looked tired. She was wearily rubbing her temples and yawning, trying to hide it behind a napkin. I felt sorry for her. After all, she was already in her 60s, and such long gatherings were not easy for her. "Alice, would you like me to walk you home?" I offered, approaching her. "It's only a couple of blocks on foot, and the fresh air will help you feel better more quickly." My mother-in-law looked at me gratefully with her clear blue eyes, the same as Emily's. "Thank you, James. That would be wonderful," she smiled. "If you don't mind a walk at such a late hour, of course." "Not at all. It's my pleasure," I assured her. "Let me just grab my jacket and I'll walk you home in no time." Emily nodded approvingly when she overheard our conversation. She always appreciated my care for her parents and encouraged our interactions. I quickly got dressed, pecked my wife on the cheek, and handed Alice her coat. We stepped out into the frosty night, leaving behind the warm house and cheerful voices. The streets were quiet and deserted. The freshly fallen snow crunched softly under our feet, and in the light of the street lamps, it sparkled like a scattering of diamonds. Alice and I walked unhurriedly along the sidewalk, glancing up at the star-studded sky from time to time. "It's so beautiful," Alice breathed, looking up in enchantment. "I can't remember the last time I saw so many stars. In the city, you can hardly see them because of the light from the street lamps and neon signs." "Yeah, that's true," I agreed. "At moments like this, you feel especially acutely how amazing our world is, and how much we miss in the daily hustle and bustle." Alice nodded, and we fell silent, each lost in our own thoughts. She was the first to break the silence. "James, I'm so glad Emily has you," she said, looking at me warmly. "You're a real pillar of support for her and for our entire family. Thank you for that." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. Alice's words touched me to the core. I had always tried to be a good husband and son-in-law, but hearing such recognition was incredibly pleasant. "It's me who should thank you, Alice," I replied, slightly embarrassed, "for raising such a wonderful daughter and accepting me into the family as one of your own. I love you all very much." Alice beamed and lightly squeezed my elbow. The gesture was completely innocent, but for some reason, a barely noticeable shiver ran through my body. I tried to push away the unbidden thoughts and focused on our conversation. We continued to walk and chat leisurely about everything under the sun. Alice told me about her youth, how she met Emily's father, and how they overcame difficulties together. I, in turn, shared my dreams and hopes, which I rarely talked about even with my wife. It seemed that on this magical night, you could talk about the most intimate things without fear of judgment or misunderstanding. Alice and I seemed to have grown closer, bound by invisible threads of trust and affection. The farther we walked, the more distinctly I felt a strange attraction between us. Our hands kept touching, sending electric shocks through my body. Our eyes met and then shyly turned away. The tension in the air was almost palpable. "You know, you have very beautiful eyes," Alice suddenly said, looking into my face. "Green with golden specks, an unusual combination." For a moment I was taken aback, not knowing how to react to the compliment. Alice had never said anything like that to me before. Maybe the frosty air and starry sky had just gone to her head. Thank you," I stammered, feeling myself blush. "You have very beautiful eyes, too, like Emily's. It must run in the family." My mother-in-law smiled, clearly pleased with my reaction. She moved a little closer, gently pressing against my side. She smelled of sweet perfume and a little of wine. We had all had a glass of red with dinner. "You know, I once dreamed of having a son," Alice said softly. "Don't get me wrong, I love my daughters madly, but sometimes I missed having a man's shoulder beside me, especially after Peter passed away. So I'm very glad you came into our lives." With those words, she suddenly stopped and turned to me. Her face was so close that I could see every wrinkle in the corners of her eyes. My breath caught, my heart pounding somewhere in my throat. "And here's my house," my mother-in-law whispered, not taking her eyes off me. "Would you like to come in for a cup of tea? Just for a little while, simply to warm up before heading back." My mind was screaming at me that I should refuse and run home as fast as I could, that I was playing with fire, balancing on the edge. But my body acted as if separate from me. Instead of "no thank you," I heard my own voice saying, "I'd love to, Alice. You know I can't refuse a cup of your signature tea." She beamed and pulled me by the hand toward the house. Still in disbelief at the reality of what was happening, I obediently followed her, feeling butterflies in my stomach. What was I doing? But it was too late to back out. As soon as the door closed behind us, reality seemed to fade into the background. The hallway was dark and quiet, with only a subdued light from the floor lamp in the living room. Alice silently helped me take off my jacket, her touch seeming to burn even through my sweater. I turned to her, wanting to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. Alice's eyes danced with mischievous sparks, her lips curving into a promising smile. She ran her hand along my cheek, and that was enough to break down the last barriers. Our lips met in a hot, passionate kiss. All thoughts and doubts instantly evaporated, leaving only an all-consuming desire. We kissed frantically, greedily, as if starved for each other over the long years. Clothes flew to the floor, hands explored bare skin, breaths mingled. We collapsed onto the couch in the living room, unable to tear ourselves away from each other for a moment. Reality seemed like a distant dream. There were only us, entwined in an embrace, drowning in pleasure. Our bodies moved in a single rhythm, moans and sighs echoing off the walls. Every touch, every movement of the hips sent waves of acute, incomparable pleasure through the nerves. We made love passionately, selflessly, as if for the first and last time. For a moment the whole world ceased to exist, leaving only a flash of pure, concentrated bliss. And then reality returned, and with it came realization. God, what have we done? How could we have succumbed to this madness, crossed the line? I lay staring at the ceiling, trying to catch my breath. Beside me, Alice sobbed convulsively, and a wave of shame and guilt washed over me. What will happen now? How will we be able to look our loved ones in the eye? One mistake, and our lives could collapse like a house of cards. These thoughts were tearing me apart, and I had no idea how to deal with it. Alice was the first to break the silence. She sat up on the couch, fixing her tousled hair, and said quietly but firmly, "James, what just happened was a huge mistake. We shouldn't have given in to this madness. We need to just forget about it and move on with our lives." I nodded, still not looking at her. Alice was right. There was no other way out. We couldn't let a momentary burst of passion destroy our families and hurt our loved ones. "Let's agree," my mother-in-law continued, her voice trembling slightly. "We won't tell anyone about what happened here. Not Emily, not anyone else. We'll just pretend that nothing happened. Do you agree?" "I agree," I managed. "This will never happen again. We'll handle it." We hurriedly got dressed, avoiding looking at each other. The atmosphere in the room had become unbearably tense, the air seeming to thicken and press down on our shoulders. I mumbled something about having to go home and practically ran out of Alice's house. All the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. How could I be close to Emily now, look her in the eye, hug her, and remember what had happened with her mother? This duality was eating away at me from the inside. For the next few weeks, Alice and I carefully avoided each other. At family gatherings, I always found an excuse to stay away from my mother-in-law, and she, in turn, seemed not to notice my presence. Emily raised an eyebrow in surprise, seeing our sudden alienation, but didn't ask any questions. However, the unspoken words and unlived feelings didn't go away. They hovered invisibly between us, filling every encounter with painful tension. I didn't know how long we could maintain this shaky facade, pretending that everything was fine. Life went on as usual, but for me, everything had changed irrevocably. That fateful night was forever imprinted in my memory, reminding me of itself every time I looked at Alice or was left alone with my thoughts. I understood that I had to somehow live with this burden, but I had no idea how to do it. The only thing I knew for sure was that I love Emily and our family. and I would do everything to preserve what we had built together. Even if it meant burying the secret of that night in the farthest corners of my memory and never returning to it. Maybe someday the guilt and awkwardness would dull, and Alice and I could relate to each other as before, as relatives bound by ties of love for our family. But that was a matter for the future. For now, all I could do was keep living, carrying my cross and hoping for the best. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.